But we're going to talk briefly about that and then the consequences imposed on George for having dared to use a gun in self-defense. Robert, thanks so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Mr. Pratt, thank you for having me. The pleasure's all mine.
You all have been put through something that should never have happened. This is the ordeal has been strictly manufactured by the media, and I just want you to know that there's a whole bunch of us all around the country that really our hearts go out to you, and we appreciate your steadfastness, really, because I haven't seen any whimpering or wimping out, just continuing under very, very difficult circumstances. So my hat's off to you, I can tell you that.
Well, thank you very, very much for your kind words. I really appreciate them. We certainly do feel supported by many people across this country, and that was one of the reasons, out of respect to them, that we spoke out in the beginning and continue to speak out. We see that this could happen to anyone, not just to George. And it is a little bit difficult sometimes, but it's my life's work to see to it that this kind of political persecution never happens again.
We are in a long-term battle, and we may get tired, but we can't quit. So hooray for your commitment of a lifetime. Why don't we begin by addressing some of the... I think almost everybody that's listening to this show certainly has heard about George defending himself, getting the tar beat out of him, Martin going for the gun that he saw in George's waistband. That's pretty well known, but I think there are some misconceptions that perhaps even people that would otherwise be sympathetic have just accepted, because even though we all know the media lies, when we hear a particular story, we think, well, that's true. We're kind of double-minded about that. So why don't we address some of these problems that you think are most commonly encountered, the misunderstandings that people most frequently come up with?
Well, I think a couple things come to mind right away when you say that. First, when you talk about, the listener today, I'm sure they have heard a lot of the elements of what happened that night. I'm sure they paid attention to court, but that, brings to light, what about the people who haven't? What about the people who simply bought into the media narrative that this young man, Mr. Martin, was canonized, for lack of a better word, a saint because of his age, maybe because of his race, and George was vilified, and that is simply what people accepted and continue, unfortunately, to be misinformed and still continue to use that premise going forward in their arguments. And it's really unfortunate because it's a big misunderstanding of what actually happened. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I believe my brother, the night of February 26th, like any lawful gun owner, was doing everything he was legally allowed to do. I think that the moment that incident became fatal was when Mr. Martin decided that he was going to threaten to kill George and to move to disarm him or to take his gun away from him. Now, the left doesn't want to hear that. They just want to talk about Skittles. But the reality is...
Skittles being carried by a cherubic-looking, kind of like a choir boy, 12 years old. And what a difference between that picture that was retailed almost always in the media and what Martin actually looked like. He was a big guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was a big guy. And look, the deceptive imagery, a picture does speak 1,000 words, and the media knew what they were doing when they did that. They say that the pictures were provided by the family. I understand that. There were other ways of obtaining pictures of Mr. Martin, and the media didn't do its job. They had absolutely no interest in...
Well, it turns out the family, 3 days after the event, had retained a PR firm.
That's my understanding, right. And I mean, the PR firm did its job well, but we can't let anyone else like that in the future get away with what they got away with. The problem is that there was so little known about George, there was a vacuum there that the media decided that they were going to fill. And everyone from NBC, who deceptively edited his call to police, to every network that ran pictures that were deceptive of both George and Trayvon Martin, share the blame. I think that the media is going to do what they're going to do. But I don't think they should be allowed to get away with it when it comes to race or when it comes to infringing upon our rights. Right.
There's an animus among the media and the liberals in general, but then I kind of repeat myself, against self-defense. I think many of them genuinely believe that what George was doing and what so many of us do, carrying a firearm, heavens, even owning a firearm, we're told that that's only going to escalate the situation, that surely we can talk about things, and that's not going to happen if somebody has a gun. And that's what they constantly tell us.
Well, the media and the liberal left has been very good at kind of making the focus point of violence a gun, when in reality, a gun is a life-saving tool. That's why it's the Second Amendment in our Constitution. That's why, after the First Amendment, the one that arguably sets up our way of life for most of us in our everyday life as we go about, freedom of speech and so forth, the next protection that we have, the one that George Washington spoke so eloquently about, is the right to keep and bear arms to protect the First Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights. Now, the left is very good at making the gun the enemy, and the left is very good at painting or promoting the notion that the police solve everything, that government is here to feed us, to clothe us, to send us to school, to pay our bills, to provide cell phones for us, to provide, supplemental income, and also the government will protect you in every situation, in every circumstance. There's no need for you to do anything, not to own a gun, not to have a job, not to want to have an education to better yourself, and that just ties in with the left's mentality, the socialist elite, the limousine liberals that want everyone to depend exclusively on the government. The problem with that is
that puts it very well.
Under the guise of it's under the guise of disarmament, and it's all very incremental. Some of the things even happening out in California where they're trying to, in Sacramento, register ammunition sales. That's really alarming, because after registration comes limitation, and after limitation, if you're not even allowed to buy ammunition for the guns you already own, the guns you already own are, in essence, worthless.
The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns, and that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.
Back again, and my guest today is Robert Zimmerman. We're talking about the ordeal that, George went through, but certainly the whole family, from everything I can gather, has been going through. Robert, one of the misconceptions, or just areas of ignorance perhaps, that has really affected the way people understand what happened that fateful night is somehow Travon Martin was, this happy little cherubic fellow, on his way from buying some Skittles. And what I've since learned, and correct me if I'm wrong, the house where Trayvon was staying, that was the first day he was there because his mom had kicked him out of their house. That house, his dad's girlfriend's house, was about 5 minutes from the convenience store. When all the trouble came down, Trayvon was about 20 minutes still from that store. Clearly, he wasn't heading directly home, even though there was a pouring rain.
There's something in court called the authentication standard, and you have to, when you have a piece of an email, a text message, and there's different standards in different jurisdictions, that deal with, is this really the communication of, for example, Larry Pratt, or did someone hack his system, or did they write it? What we do know, I'm not comfortable with parsing out every second and every minute. I know that whatever Mr. Martin was doing was in such a way that resembled loitering that it definitely caught George's attention. It's absurd. It's just absolutely absurd to think that someone would call the police on someone to report them suspicious because they were walking. And that seemed kind of what the narrative took off. So he was just walking home. I don't think so. He wasn't just walking home. It was more like loitering, and it was loitering between homes in an area where nobody in that community loiters between homes or looks at houses or circles people's trucks or whatever, unless they're intending on doing something. That's what had happened in the past. Now, if we're to believe that these messages that emerged in the defense's discovery, particularly about his mother kicking him out of his house on more than one occasion, particularly about him trying to secure codeine to make drugs for himself, apparently, or more disturbingly, at 17 years old, trying to purchase weapons, a firearm. If we're to believe those all came from Travon Martin, then it may be the case that Travon Martin is the victim of many things. Clearly, the jury found he's not the victim of a murder. That was the story that George told the police. It was a case of self-defense and one that his family repeated early and often. But the day I'm a parent, if I have a minor in my care and they're trying to procure guns or codeine, it's my job to know about it, and it's my job to stop it.
He had been, I guess one of the times he'd been kicked out of school, they'd found Martin with a bag of women's jewelry. Kind of makes it look like he got it other than going to a jewelry store?
Well, there's something going on there in that Miami-Dade school police department. I know that the chief has since been replaced, but what was going on down there was the chief of police, what has come out in affidavits, what it appears to be a case of, is the chief of police telling his subordinates to cook the numbers. In other words, where criminal activity happened, to, instead of, for example, reporting stolen jewelry that was found, you just report it as found jewelry, so that that person would not enter the criminal justice system, but rather they could be deferred to some other consequence, like, treatment or counseling or what have you. And that seemed to be what was happening at large in Miami-Dade. They wanted to look or appear to outsiders as a more crime-free area than they actually were in reality, and the way they did it is by misreporting or not reporting very relevant things that would have been in any other part of this country considered a crime.
And so it didn't go on his record, on Martin's record, and basically they were just saying, well, there's nothing here to see, just keep on moving, folks. And I think we know, certainly I know as a parent and a grandparent, that if you do that with a child, you're not helping the child. The child is going to come to the conclusion that, hey, I can do anything I want. Nobody's going to say boo.
I have to agree. I don't think that that's the right course of action. It's, unfortunately some parents take that route, but it's even more profoundly more disturbing when the government decides that they're going to take that route, and instead of applying appropriate consequences that would apply to, for example, an adult at a Target or an adult who broke into a home to steal jewelry, if that's the case, if that's what happened there in Miami, and the consequence is just, we're not going to write your name on a police report and we're going to call what you found, then that's profoundly disturbing that that's the reality of the country we live in now. We just cook the books for more funding.
At least we do in the school jurisdiction that we're talking about, and that's
in Miami-Dade.
Right, and I'm afraid that there'd probably be quite a few others that might have the same philosophy, because it's kind of the flip side of the zero tolerance. Guns are terrible. Don't even draw a picture of a gun. And then on the other hand, they essentially turn the other way when there's criminal activity involved, for the very reason that you've said. They don't want their books to look too bad. They're cooking them. All that's going to do is produce people who all too often will come out as delinquent, that will be criminally inclined, because their experience is, nobody stops me, so I can do anything I want. That's quite a lesson.
Right. It's quite an encouraging message to hear, from the police themselves, that when you are caught doing something you shouldn't be doing, that because of these zero tolerance policies, we're just going to pretend like that never happened, so we can continue to say, we have this policy in effect, and everything is fine here in Miami-Dade.
What the prosecution put him through, and ultimately what the media has put him through. I am not aware of a mainline media account that actually goes into what we were just talking about, Robert. What was Trayvon doing with so many minutes away from the convenience store to get those Skittles when the place where he was staying was 5 minutes away? There's 15 minutes.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the prosecution was playing the emotional if you will, to try to convince those jurors that, because someone has died, someone should be convicted of murder. And fortunately, court has this great way of, despite what the media says and despite what the public thinks, it's this filter that's put on information, or in this case, a tremendous amount of misinformation, and the right things reach the jurors' ears and eyes. And, it's not just what they omitted in terms of the facts of the case, but it's what they may have omitted, and we will find out because Mr. O'Mara has asked for judicial inquiry into criminal contempt to find if there is criminal contempt in the prosecution in terms of withholding so much of the evidence that took them months and months to get. The most famous being the picture of George in the back of a police car, bloodied up. Now, that picture was taken and available the night of the incident. It took them months to get that picture. Mr. De La Rienda went before the court and said, whatever I have, you already have. Whatever was given to me, you have.
Oh, that was a flat-out lie. I didn't realize he'd actually been that bald-faced. Wow.
Yeah, it's not how prosecution is supposed to work. It's not like whatever's given to you, that's what you're supposed to provide. If there is any evidence, even if it is exculpatory, it's the prosecutor's job to seek it out, to find it, and to disclose it and turn it over in a timely way. This prosecution, played hide the ball, not just with that, but with phone records, unflattering pictures of minors, posing pictures of purportedly Trayvon Martin holding a gun that were suppressed, that were not.
Or another picture that I've seen, a non-cherubic Trayvon Martin holding up his two middle fingers for the camera.
Sure, I think that was a social media posting, but the director of IT saw some things, when he was doing his investigating that he thought were so disturbing that he might face some kind of criminal liability down the road if he did not make the defense team aware. His name is Ben Kroidbos.
He lost his job, didn't he?
He lost his job. He's suing the state attorney for $5 million.
I hope he prevails.
I hope he does too, because we need people like that when things are not passing the sniff test and there's somebody's life on the line to speak up. And I don't want to see another person. There's a lot of people intimidated now by what happened to George in terms of carrying a firearm. I don't want to see more people who are ethical, who work for the government, intimidated by their employer into doing whatever it takes, including the suppression of evidence, to lock somebody up for the rest of their life.
What are some of the things that this gentleman felt had to be presented to the defense that hadn't been presented?
Well, the way I understand it, there was no evidence to him that anything had been presented. What had happened was this, and to use layman's terms and to make this very simple, he ran a report. Let's say 1,000 pages came out. Well, he had, it was his understanding that the defense had maybe 500 pages. So he said, well, that's strange because when I run the same report, I get 1,000 pages, and among these missing things are very unflattering pictures and data and information that came from Mr. Martin's cell phone. Now, I'm running these reports. They go under my hand, and I'm representing them to be accurate, but when the defense gets them, they don't look like anything that I am finding. So I don't want to be held in some kind of, not necessarily held, but facing criminal liability or civil liability for appearing to withhold evidence or to be complicit in the withholding of evidence along with Ms. Corey in her office. So
the only thing we can conclude then is that Ms. Corey, the prosecutor, was deliberately withholding information that she was by law required to make available to the defense.
That is one very strong possibility. It certainly seems to be what the defense has suggested. The other route, if you would, is to kind of make the information available in a way that is not usable. For example, needing an $11,000 machine to decode these pieces of information that the defense team doesn't have and they wouldn't know to have, and they would have no way of procuring in that limited time, days before the trial starts, to just dump this file on someone and say, good luck. But that's like handing someone the alphabet and calling it the Bible because all the letters are in there. That's in essence what may have happened.
Where do you go where you're not recognized and where there's not somebody that only knows what the liberal media has told them and, oh, you're the guy that got away with murder?
Right. Oh, absolutely. This is the acquittal is now, but we've been in a quasi, bizarre reality for a long time, really since March of 2012. And this is not something that is easy to do. What we had to do, in essence, was vanish from the face of the earth in 2012 and 2013 and never be found, not traced, not located by any media, by anyone who would want to do us harm. Absolutely, it wiped out all of our funds. Our parents were retired and had money saved and were doing very well for themselves, and they had to support all their children.
We're talking about the ordeal of the whole George Zimmerman family, an extended family. You know, one of the things maybe that we ought to take a look at, I took the trouble of kind of digging to find it out because it wasn't lying there in any headlines, but the notion that somehow Holder is going to bring charges for a hate crime, you know, lots of luck, Mr. Attorney General. If I'm not mistaken, your great-grandfather in Peru was an African, as in black. That your mother...
Right, our mother's grandfather, correct.
Okay, that your mother, I think I heard a soundbite, she's clearly Latina, she speaks with an accent, that George is bilingual, you may be too, that George had mentored black children. That alone struck me as, this is a guy that runs around looking for blacks because he's a volunteer Klansman? I don't think so. That doesn't work.
Sure. You know, and that's not something, like you said, you had to dig. It's not something that fit the media narrative, so it wasn't something really that the media wanted to talk about. Now, as it relates to Mr. Holder and the Justice Department, you know, they're within their rights to investigate if that's what they want to do. I think that, unfortunately, some of the leadership is sending mixed messages that's really not helping. They're really focusing on the stand your ground law as if it is somehow an element of this case. And the stand your ground is just one component of self-defense. What it does, in essence, is it eliminates the duty to retreat. And it also, if you use pre-trial stand your ground as your defense and enter a motion to have a hearing on stand your ground, if you are found immune from prosecution, you are also found immune from civil liability. So it with one application of the law, can prevent you from being found criminally liable as well as from being dragged through civil court for years on end, with people trying to, you know, sue you for money for wrongful death. Now, the Florida Sheriff's Association has come out in support of the Stand Your Ground law just this month, and they are pulling no punches. They're very supportive of the law. They say that it should stand the way that it stands, and just today, this morning, in fact, the Florida legislature announced that there would not be a special session to review stand your ground laws, despite the 33 legislators who wrote a letter requesting a special session, and the governor has come out, made a commission to study it, and the commission found that the law was sound the way that it's written. Now, stand your ground wasn't a factor here because Mr. Martin was mounted on top of George, raining down blows.
So you didn't even, George didn't even invoke stand your ground. It was simply a basic self-defense defense.
Correct. It was simply a basic self-defense defense. That doesn't mean, though, going forward, that stand your ground is not something that people look at, law enforcement specifically, or, you know, state attorneys, when they're looking at if there should be charges brought against someone because of that duty to retreat element of the self-defense statute as a whole. You know, if you are in some kind of, for example, if you're in a Walmart packing your car late at night and someone runs up to you with a knife drawn and says, "I'm going to kill you," what stand your ground, what that component says is that you're not required to run back into the Walmart and hope you're going to make it and not get killed. It means you are allowed to meet force with force, including deadly force, standing your ground where you are. Now, if it turns out that that was a rubber knife, if it turns out that that was a friend playing a joke or some kind of mistaken identity, or if it turns out that that was not a real threat that could have ended your life, but you perceived it to be one, right, that's the standard that stand your ground establishes, that you do not have to actually retreat to determine if it's actually a real threat that could kill you, or you do not have to determine if the threat is in fact real. You just have to perceive it to be real. You
don't have to present it to a jury before you can act. You're able to act on your understanding, your fear, or lack thereof, at the time.
Correct.
I think that's very important, and that's the way the law should be. because actually fleeing, even if it would appear to be possible, could often put one in even greater risk. There's a scholar, Gary Kleck, who has found that people who resist a criminal assault are much more likely to emerge safe than those who offer no resistance at all. That's kind of the way evil is. The more they can perceive that they can get away with, the more they'll try to get away with. And that's...
Look, I could not agree more, Mr. Pratt, and that's why I keep speaking out about self-defense. I think it sends the wrong message to people who would do you harm that when they threaten you in any way, shape, or form, the law says you must run away. I think that's the wrong message. There's a lot of home invasions in Florida. There's a very aged population here who really rely on their Second Amendment rights and their firearms to be able to defend themselves, not only in their home, but at large in their communities. And telling them that if someone comes up to them, to carjack them and, or worse, that they're supposed to just throw up their arms and surrender and begin to run away, sends the wrong message. I think that people who would do someone harm should know that in Florida, people do carry concealed weapons. And if you threaten someone, and you threaten them in a way that they perceive as deadly, they will stand their ground and they will meet your threat with lethal force.
Before we run out of time, because we're in the countdown now, I want to give out the two websites. The first is to help pay off the attorney that did this on his own account, hoping that maybe he would get paid, but George wasn't able to. He hasn't been able to work, so let's help this guy out because he really has done something tremendous. It's called the GZ, as in George Zimmerman, GZDefenseFund.com, and that's where you can go make a contribution to defray the legal expenses, which are still rather monumental. And then if you want to go to a blog and find out some of George's dad's statements and opinions about this ongoing thing, robertandgladys.com. And you can also make a contribution there. The whole family's been kicked in the teeth financially, so anything that can be done would be just terrific. I really appreciate the articulate way you all have stayed in this fight, and speaking out. And ultimately, I think it's going to encourage people to know that, it was tough, but you stood firm. All of you did. And by golly, maybe I should defend myself instead of turning my back and getting a bullet or a knife stuck in it. So it's really pretty important that we get your message out. People can't be standing there with their hand on their gun thinking, gee, do I want to do this or not? Am I going to be able to afford the legal bills or not? And that's really, I think, where the prosecution has tried to put you and put us.
Look, there's all kinds of psychological games that are played with the American people in all different facets of society, from not letting people who own gun stores to enter into contests at Staples to mayors against illegal guns being accused of all kinds of acts of impropriety, padding their death victim numbers by including criminals that are shot justifiably by police, and on and on and on. And the message that we can't afford going forward is that what happened to George could happen to you. What actually happened to George is he saved his life. Unfortunately, the politics of race got involved. The politics of gun control got involved. It was, exacerbated by the horrible disaster that happened at Newtown, where, again, the left demonized the gun instead of the demon, this psycho who did this horrendous act.
Yep.
And I think that we need to be aware that it's not just in the legislature that these battles are being waged. They're being waged in the hearts and mind of the people. They're trying to convince people guns are bad and guns should be equated with violence, as opposed to the real message. Guns are our right and guns save our life. And
well, Robert Zimmerman, that's a great way to leave the story. Your family is tough. We appreciate you.